Let's get started. خلينا نبدأ. الأول خليني أعرفكم بنفسي. أنا محمد عناني. أنا دلوقتي بشتغل في جوجل بقالي 9 شهور. حاليا بيزد في ميونخ في ألمانيا. أنا اتخرجت من الجامعة الأمريكية في مصر. اشتغلت في مصر سنتين. كنت أو 3 سنين غالبا. كنت في فاليو. في أول شغلانة ليا. قعدت هناك حوالي سنة ونص، وبعد كده اشتغلت في ستارت اب تانية اسمها سهل. برضو قعدت هناك سنة ونص، وبعد كده ترانزيشند لجوجل. برضو عايز اعرفكم برضو باحمد عجيزة. احمد عجيزة برضو معانا في الشات وفي الميتنج. هو بيساعدني في الكونتنت والمودريشن. ف most of the time اي حاجه محتاجينها كcontent logistics requests، اي حاجه treat me and him as the same person. We're both going to answer your questions. لو في مشكله او حاجه احنا الاثنين موجودين معاكم في الديسكورد سيرفر، ومعظم المانجمنت بتاعت الكونتنت هتبقى عن طريق الديسكورد سيرفر. انا برضو هبقى بعمل اناونسمنتس عن طريق السيرفر او على لينكدين، بس يعني لما اجي بقى احط كونتنت او ريسورسز او كده كلها معظمها هيبقى على الديسكورد سيرفر نفسه. طيب، الحاجه الثانيه، يعني انا واخد بس اول ربع ساعه او حاجه بتكلم على احنا بنعمل ايه هنا. السيرفر ده وظيفته ايه، الكلام ده كله. انا بالنسبه لي الانيشيتيف ده هو مينلي انيشيتيف انا كنت عايز اعمله to help people عامه become better software engineers, to help people know what you need to do well in interviews, what can you expect، الكلام ده كله. وفي برضو point to raise. انا عارف ان في في correlation او في similarities ما بين البريباريشنز اللي ممكن تبقى محتاجها او السكيل سيت اللي انت محتاجها وكومبتيتيف بروجرامينج. ACM الكومبيتيشنز دي عامه، ده تراك وده تراك، الاثنين كوريليتد. بس الديستنكشن اللي انا عايز اوضحه ان الفوكس بتاع اللي احنا بنعمله هنا is not to do competitive programming. في فورمز كتيره ممكن تبقى تارجتد لحاجه زي كده. انا الهدف بالنسبه لي اكتر ان احنا نبقى بنتكلم اكتر على الحاجات الاساسيه that you need to do well in the job market عامه. فمش هيبقى الفوكس على الكومبتيتيف بروجرامينج اكتر منه focusing on the skill set you need to do well in your career يعني. برضو حاجه مهمه to mention، السيشنز دي recorded. انا برضو السيشن دي included is recorded. احنا بنريكورد السيشنز لسببين. اللي عايز يريفيزيت الريكوردنج عشان يراجع حاجه، يشوف حاجه احنا كنا بنتكلم فيها، then they can refer back to a recording. الحاجه الثانيه ان الناس اللي بتمس السيشنز لاي سبب عادي ممكن يبقوا عايزين يبصوا على البريفيوس سيشنز فيقدروا يشوفوا الريكوردنجز دي. الريكوردنجز دي هتبقى بعد كده يعني uploaded على يوتيوب channel، او at least دي البلان. ف once we arrange ان احنا نجوفرن الكونتنت ونظبطها، انا برضو هبقى بحط اللينكس بتاعت الريكوردنجز ديت مع كل سيشن. طيب، الحاجه الثانيه برضو ان البلاتفورم ده is not focused on basic understanding of programming. يعني انا هبقى في prerequisite او في assumption انا هعمله ان at least you know how to write basic code, you know the basics of programming. لان انا دي مش هتبقى حاجه انا بخش في التفاصيل بتاعتها. انا اكتر اللي هو هنبقى we know how to write code، بس احنا عايزين نستخدم code to solve problems او to basically يعني answer questions on interview related to interviews او algorithms او data structures. ده الفوكس، بس we will not be talking about how to write code. طيب، ايه الفريكونسي بتاعت السيشنز؟ انا لسه طبعا دي اول سيشن، انا ما عنديش expectations الاودينس هيبقى قد ايه، الديماند هيبقى قد ايه، البيس بتاع الناس قد ايه، بس اتليست انا هحاول ان انا ابقى بعمل الموضوع دوت on a weekly basis. بس يعني انا once this is يعني settled او عرفت الدايركشن اللي احنا ماشيين فيه، هبدا ابقى حاطط a more consistent schedule يعني. بس for now let's be flexible about it. انا as we go هبقى announce السيشنز قبليها بشويه، واحاول ان انا ايه اخليها on a weekly basis at least يعني. برضو in general depending على ال size of the audience والكلام ده كله. انا هبقى بطلب منكم لو احنا جروب كبير ان احنا نبقى بنبوست الكويستشنز ان شات، او لو حد عايز يسال سؤال او حاجه زي كده ان شات. انا لو during البرزنتيشن او انا بتكلم، لو في حاجه هعرف انسر ات ريليفنت للبارت اللي انا بتكلم فيه دلوقتي هجاوب عليها. otherwise usually هيبقى في time في الاخر to ask questions. ولو في حد برضو عايز يسال سؤال او ينتربت please use ال raise the hand feature، وانا يعني هادرس الاسئله كلها يعني. طيب I think ان الحاجه الاساسيه برضو الثانيه ان most of الانتراكشنز بتاعتنا through problem solving او through ايا كان اللانجوج اوف يوز هتبقى سي بلس بلس. يعني دي اللانجوج اللي انا متعود عليها بصراحه، واللانجوج اللي انا comfortable فيها ان انا اقدر اتكلم ويعني اشرح عليها. ف يعني سامحوني لو في ناس بتستخدم بايثون ومش عاجبها سي بلس بلس او كده، بس يعني اتليست يعني ممكن اوف لاين، او لو في حاجه مش واضحه اشرحها، او حتى في السيشن نفسها لو في كي ووردز او في داتا ستراكشر اسمها مش مفهوم ممكن نشرحها in the abstract sense يعني. بس C++ will be the main language. ال البلاتفورم اللي احنا عاملينه for Discord is also available to be used for offline purposes. It's not just about السيشنز. It's not just an online thing. انا عايز الموضوع برضو يبقى فيه offline collaboration. I hope ان الموضوع ما يبقاش interaction واقف معايا انا بس. I hope ان الناس تبقى بتساعد بعضيها، post questions, post problems that you want to solve. الكلام ده كله الانتراكشن ده حلو، وانا I will do as much as possible انا واحمد ان احنا الاثنين answer your concerns, your questions interactively على الشات او through Discord يعني. طيب في حاجة برضو مهمة I need to mention relating to this initiative. Initiative ده is a completely voluntary initiative من ناحيتي. I do not represent the company. I do not represent Google في الموضوع. It's something that I can يعني I need to also mention very clearly. I cannot talk about any sensitive information ليها علاقة بالشركة. ما اقدرش اتكلم عن الهايرنج بروسيس بتاعتنا، ما اقدرش اتكلم عن الانترفيو بروسيس. I can only talk in general. فأي حاجة that is specific to the company I cannot discuss or share، لأن ساعتها this will put me in a legal risk. فعشان كده I need to be very clear about what we're doing here والpurpose بتاعه is in a more general and a more abstract sense. التارجت بتاعي في الآخر إن أنا I want to help you in your career. I want to help you succeed. I want to help you know إيه اللي أنت محتاج تعمله عشان تعرف تperform كويس. بس I cannot give exact guidelines on anything. تمام. اوكي خلينا نبدا. اول حاجه في الاجنده بالنسبه لي هي ان احنا نسيت الرود ماب بتاعه الموضوع كله. طيب اول حاجه خلينا نتكلم فيها هي الرود ماب بتاعه مين الستيك هولدرز بتوع الانترفيو بروسيس بتاعتك، او مين الناس اللي انت هتبقى بتنتراكت معاهم from day one to be able to eventually land الجوب اللي انت عايز تلاند. انا برضو let me share white board معاكم and it will be easier to um, instruct through it. معلش ثانية واحدة. اوكي لو شايف كله شايف الشاشة. اوكي فدي اول حاجه مهمه. why is this important؟ لان الاودينس بتاعك وانت ماشي في process is different. الاودينس بتاعك من الاول للاخر ناس مختلفه. اول حد في الاودينس بتاعك هو الكومباني اللي انت بتقدم عندها. حلو. and that means ان انت لازم تبقى عارف what to expect from the process in this company. Companies have different processes. في حاجات بتبقى standard وكل حاجه، بس في حاجات بتبقى specific. It's nice to do your own research about the process بتبقى ماشيه ازاي في الشركه دي. هل البروسيس بيبقى فيها اونلاين تيست ولا لا؟ هل انت بتنتراكت مع ريكروتر في الاول ولا لا؟ هل بيبقى فيه اون سايت انترفيوز؟ هل بيبقى فيه تيست ولا لا؟ الكلام ده كله. ف the first stakeholder في الموضوع دوت is to know your company, know الجوب position اللي انت بتقدم عليه. and this is important for two things. اول حاجه ان انت تبقى عارف what to expect من البروسيس، وتاني حاجه ان انت تبقى عارف الجوب بوزيشن او الديسكربشن اللي انت بتقدم عليها. انت عايز تبقى بتعمل specific tailoring للريزومي بتاعك او السي في بتاعك، ان انت as much as possible to increase the chance of grasping the attention of a recruiter in the company to look at your CV. ف it's important ان انت تبقى هنا in this step resume focused. انا عايز اشوف الجوب اللي انا بقدم عليها، التايتل بتاعها، الريكويرمنتس بتاعتها، المينيمم ريكويرمنتس، الاديشنال ريكويرمنتس، الكلام ده كله. Why is that important؟ عشان when you actually prepare a specific resume for this position, it increases the chances بتاعتك ان انت تلاند an interview. It increases the chances بتاعتك ان انت someone will look at your profile and consider it. and في جزء من ده بيبقى اوتوميتد عن طريق الشركه، وفي جزء منه بيبقى مانيوال او حد بيبص في through السي فيز وبيعمل السكريننج ده. So your first important step is to actually get interviews. انت عايز تعرف تعدي سكريننج، انت عايز الناس تبص على الريزومي بتاعك وتقول انا عايز اتكلم مع الشخص ده، انا عايز اديله فرصه ان هو يجت hired at my company. طيب let's say ان انا I succeeded in that step. My next interaction is with the recruiter. حلو. الانتراكشن دوت هيبقى فيه ريكروتر غالبا بيكلمني بيقول لي والله thank you for applying to this position. انا عايز اسكادجول معاك كول او عايز اتكلم معاك for 15 minutes مثلا او اي حاجه. وده هيبقى تاني بوينت اوف انتراكشن مع الشركه يعني. طيب الانتراكشن مع الريكروتر از مينلي ان هو هيبقى عايز بس يتكلم معاك، يبقى في حاجات بيسالها in terms of your previous experience على خفيف. انت open to relocation ولا لا؟ الكلام ده كله. ممكن يبقى فيها very primitive screening، يبقى بيسالك بس يشوف حاجات basics عندك ولا لا. اسئله very simple just to probe. هو بيشوف الكانديديت اللي قدامه دوت حد let's give this person a chance to go forward in the step in the process او لا. and usually يعني الستاب دي بتبقى يعني لحد ما straight forward and it's mostly a social interaction مع recruiter. بتتكلموا فيها about general things منها logistics about how the process goes والكلام ده كله. and the recruiter also gives you a proper introduction about what to expect. حلو. طيب بعد الستاب بتاعت ان احنا بتبقى بتتكلم مع او يعني الستيك هولدر اللي هو الريكروتر، انت في عندك ستيك هولدر تاني اللي هم الانترفيورز. حلو. and usually this is where the most of the يعني action is happening and this is where most of the things we're going to be focusing on. تمام. ده بالنسبه لي هم الستيك هولدرز اللي انترستد. sometimes بيبقى فيه بقى يعني in post interview process بيبقى فيه بقى manager involvement او حاجه زي كده to see بقى whether you applied for a specific position. بتتكلم مع المانجر، او if you applied for a general position بتشوف كذا مانجر ويبقى بيتعمل team matching process او حاجه زي كده. حلو. بس يعني I think the important part is basically ان احنا نعدي CV screening is one step and do well in our interviews is the second step. طيب ايه ال typical stages يعني if we want to sort of translate this to a set of stages. فالstages هي CV filtration، وبعد بعد ما بنعمل filtration بيبقى غالبا في phone screening with the recruiter. الفون سكريننج دي اللي هي بتبقى الكول الانيشال. بعديها بيبقى in some companies it depends بيبقى في تيست او تاسك it depends. بيبعت لك تيست يقول لك والله I want you to answer a few problems online in your own time. حل لي المسائل ديت وغالبا دي بتبقى automatically graded، او بيطلب منك تاسك والله انا عايزك تعمل لي 1 2 3 and then you submit this task. In some companies after that step بيبقى في حاجه زي online initial interview and this is your first interaction with an actual interviewer. حلو. الستاب دي هيبقى فيه this is a technical interview most of the time. هيبقى حد داخل بيتكلم معاك about a problem to solve or about something domain specific على حسب البوزيشن اللي انت بتقدم عليه او كده. والبوينت بتاعته ان ده اول حد تكنيكال هيبقى بيحاول ييفالويت هل احنا ككومباني we want to invest in you ان احنا نبدا معاك a proper process of on sites ولا لا. حلو. فموست اوف ذا تايم الانترفيو ده بيحدد حاجتين، الليفل بتاعك لو الليفل مش ديفايند قوي، وبيحدد منها is it a go or a no go. لان بعد الستep دي doing on sites is usually a very expensive process بالنسبه للشركه، بس going to on site means you also did most of يعني nice steps اللي قبليها and you're now at the core of الموضوع. عدينا الاونلاين انيشال سكريننج، هيبقى بعد كده في بقى الاون سايت انترفيوز، ودي غالبا بقى ايه يعني دولت يعني ان انترفيوز على حسب بقى الشركه، بيبقوا التايبس اوف انترفيوز مختلفه، بتبقى الدiscussions اللي بتحصل فيها ديبندنت على الشركه، بس الى حد ما في سكيل سيتس معينه بتبقى مطلوبه and basically this is what we're here to do، ان احنا نحاول نimprove السكيل سيت دي، نبقى عارفين ايه اللي expected مننا فيها، نبقى عارفين how to get there. تمام. طيب from another dimension بقى، طيب انا عرفت الستيجز وعرفت الستيك هولدرز، انا ايه اللي مطلوب مني؟ حلو. طيب انا اللي مطلوب مني ان انا اعمل ريزومي كويس. حلو. الريزومي كويس من الاخر مطلوب منه ان هو يبقى بريسايز، الريزومي بتاعي يبقى بيهايلايت السكيل سيتس بتاعتي كويس. اوكي. Second, I'm sorry, I did not check the chat. Okay, I will switch to English so that everyone is understanding me. And please, if there's something that's not clear, ask me to translate. I will translate in the middle. So back to the point of what you need to actually do. So resume preparation is an important step because this is what actually gives you a chance at trying to apply for this position that you want to apply for. If you do not prepare a good resume, then there is a big chance that you're going to miss out on being selected for an interview process in the first place. And the second thing relating to this point is, if you're applying for a job, what I recommend is don't apply just for one position or one job or one company. The idea of doing an interview and landing and getting a good chance at landing a job that you want or like is to apply to a lot of positions. You need to apply to a lot of companies. This gives you two things. It increases the chance that you are able to land an interview. If you're applying to 10 positions and you get 2 or 3 of them, then at least you were able to get 2 or 3 out of 10. And the second thing is that this gives you experience. If you do well, if you do bad on one interview, you learn from the interview. If you learn from your mistakes, you understand where you need to improve, and then you can apply these new things that you learned into another interview. So it can be iterative. It doesn't have to succeed. It's not a one-time thing that either works or doesn't work. And there is a very high percentage of luck in interviews. And this is a very true statement because you never know how your process will go to compare to other people. You might be matched on interviews with different interviewers that ask different kinds of questions. You might be asked questions that you are comfortable with. You might be asked questions you're not comfortable with. You might not be ready that day. You might be stressed out. It can happen. A lot of things can go wrong. So there is a huge part of it that's luck. And that's why you need to consider a lot of positions and consider a lot of opportunities, and hopefully one of them works out. Okay, so what else do you need to do? And this is basically, I think the core part of it is that depending on your position, you need to improve your problem-solving skills. You need to be able to answer problems. You need to be able to think about them quickly. You need to be able to come up with a fast solution. You need to be able to write code in a clear and clean way. There's a lot of things involved, but problem solving is one of the most important skill sets for your typical positions in tech. The second one, and this is depending on type of company, it depends on the position and seniority you're applying for, is something called system design. Okay, and this is more related to how you build a product. Actually, it's not solving an isolated problem. It's more of, let's think about how to build the product, how to design the product, what are the different components that are involved in the product. And this is also another skill set that might be relevant, but not all the time. So let's just say here that this is not always required. But it's definitely something that's popular enough to consider. And the third thing is behavioral. The behavioral aspect of things. And a behavioral assessment is usually something that tries to probe into different experiences you had at work, different experiences you had at university. What are things that difficult situations that you dealt with before on a project or something, conflicts that you needed to handle. Basically, this is just probing your personal qualities and trying to see whether you fit in the company culture or not. A lot of the companies have, let's say, similar ideologies and similar expectations on the behavioral aspect of things. So you can also prepare for the behavioral part of your process. And what I also want to very clearly emphasize is that this is actually a very important aspect of your interviews. In some companies, they even give this a 50% of the weight. So it's not just about how technically able you are. You also need to show them that you are a nice person and a capable teammate to join the company. Okay, so this is basically the different skill sets that I think we can be worried about and think about. And most of these sessions will be focusing on problem solving. So what are we going to focus on? Mainly, let's say, I don't know, like an arbitrary number of 70% on problem solving, maybe. And if there's enough demand for it, we can also address, in some context, system design if we want. And for the behavioral part of it, I will also give you good references to refer to. I will give you what you need to understand from this, but basically you just need to prepare for this kind of interview. Behavioral interviews just require you to prepare for them, prepare scenarios that you can discuss with the interviewer, and know what to expect from the interviewer. So we will discuss these points, but I think from there you can basically just know what to expect. Okay. Let me just pause for a second here. Does anyone have a question with what I said so far? Okay, let's resume. So the second part of this is tying all of this together. Now, let me also mention what are the stakeholders looking for. So we mentioned that we have different stakeholders in our process, the recruiters, the interviewers, and so on. But at least we know that from the company slash recruiter point of view, it's more about how you present your resume. And from the interviews, let's break this down to technical interviews and behavioral interviews. So for the company and recruiter, it's basically they want to be able to, you want to impress your the company or the recruiter with your resume, and this is mainly what they care for. They also, when you're talking with the recruiter, they're also probing things like your communication skills, some personal traits that they might be alarming or not alarming to them. But in the usual sense, this is as much as it matters. And for the important part, in my opinion, is what is expected of you in a technical interview. You would think that, okay, if I am able to prepare very well to answer problems, I am very good at problem solving, I have a very decent ability to use data structures and algorithms in a very efficient and fast way. Is this enough? No. And that's why I wanted to pause here for a moment and make a quick distinction between you being a very good caliber at solving problems and you meeting the technical expectations of a technical interview. And that's why a very good example here is competitive programming. You would expect someone who's really good at competitive programming, maybe was able to go to the internationals competition, the final stage of the international ACM competitions. This is someone who is definitely going to be able to solve the problem. But is this everything that you need to pass the interviews or the technical part of it? No, because you being able to quickly answer the problem and answer it in the most optimal way is not the only part of this. So yes, if we are to like put a part of it, yes, you need to write an optimized solution. And even before the optimized solution, you need to write a correct solution. But you also need to show that you are writing clean code. And this is where you might be able to solve a problem and write the optimal code for it, but you're using an unreadable code. Your variable names are X, Y, and Z. Your arrays are A, B, and C. Your variables are whatever. You're writing all your implementation in one function. You're not organizing your code. So yes, you will be able to reach the optimized solution, and yes, you will take credit for it, but equally important is that you need to write clean code. And we will also discuss how to write clean code, how to write your solution in a readable way, what the technical interviewer is looking for. Another very important skill is also communication. And this is actually one of the biggest downfalls of people in interviews and in technical, and especially the technical ones. You are able to reach a solution at the end. You sit there and think about the problem and how to solve it, and you write some notes on your notepad. You start writing your solution and so on. But there is a problem. The interviewer does not know what you're thinking about. You need to be constantly communicating with the interviewer. And this is a skill that you actually need to work on, and it will sometimes take some time for you to be able to think out loud as you're thinking. So yes, sometimes you're still thinking about it and you want the interviewer to just stay silent until the idea comes to your head. But actually, it's important that at every step, you're able to express what you're thinking about and express what your thoughts are, and make sure that the interviewer is also able to understand what your thoughts are. This is important because sometimes your thoughts can be going in a wrong direction. And if they're going in a wrong direction, the interviewer is actually the best asset you have in an interview. They can give you a hint. They can tell you, maybe you're making a wrong assumption. Maybe you didn't understand the problem correctly. So communication is a very essential tool in the interview, and communicating your thoughts at all times is important. You should not jump to writing a solution. And in the best way, you do not have to think about the optimal solution from the beginning. Actually, an interviewer will really appreciate that you tell them, hey, off the top of my mind, the straightforward, naive solution is to do 1, 2, 3. The interviewer will be happy with this. It's a data point. They know you're able to at least come up with a correct solution. You're able to tell them, hey, I know that we have this milestone that we can start with. And then tell them, hey, I think we can improve. Or wait for them to tell you, What if we can do something better? What do you think? It goes back and forth. Another important thing is assumptions. What are assumptions? Assumptions are basically things that are not stated in your problem clearly, and you might depend on them in your solution. So, and this is actually something that's important. Interviewers would typically leave this for you to figure out. They want to listen to what you have to say. So they tell you the problem is, I want you to, I don't know, sort this array or something. Okay, so, and that's all they say. So one thing you would ask is, okay, how many elements do I have? How big is the problem space? Can I sort in place, or can I use extra memory? There is a lot of things that the interviewer will leave for you to ask. So building proper assumptions is important, and communicating them is important, because if you start implementing with an assumption that you do not mention, then that means if this assumption is not true, your solution is incorrect. Another also very important part is testing mentality. And what does testing mentality mean? Why is this important? You wrote a solution, or you discussed a solution. Now the interviewer wants to see if you know your solution will work for all use cases or not. Will it pass all possible cases for this or not? Is there a case that was invalid? Is there something that could break your code? You need to, after or during your solution, explain how this would work for a base case, how this would work if the array is empty, how this would work if there's an integer overflow, or if something is to happen that could break your solution. You need to express all of this and show that, yes, I wrote a solution that I think will work, and I also know how to test this solution. The technical interviewer is looking for these qualities, because it's not just about how good you are at solving the problem. They want to see you as a good software engineer. And a good software engineer means that, yes, you know how to solve a problem, you know how to write clean code that everyone can read and understand. This code needs to be maintainable. They want to see that you're able to test your code, you're able to put assumptions for your solution. Where does this work, and where does this doesn't work? So essentially, it's an experience where you would think the illusion is to just reach the optimal solution, but all of these are equally important. It's not just reaching the optimal solution. So this is just a quick idea of what you can expect from the technical interview, or what the interviewer is thinking about. Now, for behavioral interviews, most of the time, it's going to be a discussion that is relating to your previous experiences. The best way to prepare for a behavioral interview is to know what they're looking for. So there are a set of qualities that they care about, and these qualities will translate into questions. So when you're asked a question, you want to know which quality is this addressing? What are they looking for? Are they looking for my ability to handle conflicts? Are they looking for my ability to communicate clearly? Are they looking for my ability to meet the deadlines? Or do they want to see, I don't know, if I am a good leader, if I'm a good team player? These are different aspects. If I am able to think about optimal solutions, or if I'm able to think about how to save, how to be frugality, or being able to save on company resources, how I'm able to solve complex problems. How do I deal in a situation where there is a failure, where something goes wrong? So I want to be able to categorize the question. This is the first part of it. I want to see what they're looking for. And then I need to be prepared with a situation that I went through before, and then express this situation. I want to tell them, yes, I have been in a situation where I was working with a teammate, and we were not able to, we had a conflict because we did not agree on the interfaces between our subcomponents, and this caused a problem that delayed our deliveries, and so on and so forth, and how we resolved this problem. So it's all about reading beforehand what you need to know and what to expect, and basically prepare a situation for each of these. You can do this in write this up in a document or something, write a couple of situations for each point, and I think you are set to go for this one. Okay. The pillar on problem solving. So here we talked about what the technical interviewer is looking for. Let's also look at what are the pillars of problem solving that we need to care about that will help me do all of this. I want to be able to impress my interviewer on these points. What skills do I need to be able to do this? So the first thing is to have a very good grasp of data structures. I want to be able to, when I think about a problem, think about the appropriate data structure to use here. And this is important. And believe it or not, we most of the time, let's say 90% of the time, you would care about the basic data structures. It's nothing complex. You just need to know your data structures well and know which use cases you can use which ones for. The other thing is algorithms. And again, there are very important algorithms and very popular ones that I need to be aware of. I do not need the very complex algorithms. Yes, it can happen maybe 1% of the time that you get a very complicated algorithm that is usually not expected to be known, and it happens. But for the most part, you need a good grasp of the important algorithms. Understand the different use cases that they are applicable for. Understand the different kinds of problems that I can basically translate to a solution that uses one of these algorithms I'm good at. And in general, your ability to think about a problem will be better. You will be able to think about better solutions when you have a better grasp of data structures and algorithms. These are your tools that you can use to think about a problem. So if you prime them up better, you're able to use them better. You're able to think about the problem in a different way. You have more options to think about from. And the other thing is complexity analysis. And complexity analysis is basically being able to say, hey, I have a solution to a problem. I need to be able to describe how fast is this solution, how much time it takes. And I want to be able to express how much space, how much memory do I need for my solution. These are very important. And in almost anything, complexity analysis is going to be what helps you determine which solution is better than the other one. If I have a solution that runs in polynomial time, an n-squared solution, and I have a solution that runs in linear time in n, then obviously the one that runs in n is faster. But maybe I care more about space, and the first solution doesn't need me to use extra space, and the second solution requires me to use n space. And if I am restricted by memory, for example, I might need the first one. If I'm restricted by speed or performance, I could use the second one. Usually people care about your solution being fast, but you should also not be blindsided by a situation where you actually care about memory more, or that the memory you need is not feasible. Okay. Let me pause here for a second. Do you have any questions about the content that we discussed so far? You can also raise your hand, or we can proceed if there are no questions. Okay.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, but they're not directly related to the content. If you want to address them now or later, up to you.
Let me really quickly pull up the chat. I'm sorry. I suck at finding these things. Yeah. I closed the chat. Can you read them out for me?
Yeah. So the first question is like, what is from Mustafa? What's the level of problem solving should I reach?
Okay. The second one.
I think this one is already answered, but like someone was asking if you can share your own experience with perspective about your interviews at work at Google, and I told him that it's probably you cannot disclose this specific information related to Google.
Yeah, so the second one I cannot disclose. This is a very strict policy. So I can only speak from my own experience. I can only speak from things that are not relating to Google's process. And what I try to do is be as general as possible, discuss what you would expect in general, and hopefully this skill set would help you land whatever job you want eventually. So really, it is not tied to a specific process. These things are general, and it's a general skill set to have, not just to be able to pass your interview process, but it's also what you need to be a solid software engineer. The way you think about the problems, how you write your code, and so on. And the first question about what level do you need to reach? Actually, I will also speak to this later, but you can, one of the common pitfalls or challenges that I see with people is that they expect if you want to do well in your interviews, you need to be doing really well at competitive programming. And you know, the answer is no. You do not need to be a good competitive programmer to be able to be a good problem solver and pass and have enough skill set to pass your interviews. And that's why I wanted to make this distinction. You do not need to know all the knowledge and all the different situations and all the things that you need to become a competitive programmer to pass the process. It's a much more relaxed requirement. And I will also describe what you actually need. Okay, so for this second part of the session today, I think it's a nice idea to go through a problem together, a very simple one, maybe see what we can expect, how the sessions would be navigated or done, and hopefully you can get a rough idea of how this should go. I will try to close the whiteboard. Okay. So this is an example of what to expect usually from these sessions, what kind of things we would be doing. This is an example of what we would do to prepare for the problem-solving part, where we can improve our data structure knowledge, where we can improve our algorithmic knowledge, and basically set an expectation for what we would need to succeed. This website is LeetCode. I will also share all the resources that I mentioned in the sessions and the Discord server for your reference. And LeetCode is basically a platform with a lot of problems that are categorized in different types of problems, different areas, and so on. It has different difficulties. You can use your favorite programming language, and it's a very nice platform, in my opinion, to prepare for your problem-solving interviews and brush up on your algorithmic and data structure knowledge. I will probably be using it for the most part. I might refer to other resources in the middle, but for me, this one was my favorite one. It's easy enough. It's friendly enough, and we can also use this in general. So let's just discuss this problem really quickly. It's basically a two-sum problem, and the description is saying that we are given an array of integers, and we have a target that we're looking for, where basically the target is composed of two elements in my array that are added together that add up to this target. So it says here that given an array of integers and an integer target, I want to return the indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. And here it says you may assume that each input would have exactly one solution. So yeah, in an interview, if they don't tell you this assumption, for example, then probably you're expected to express this. Do I have one solution? Do I have multiple solutions? What do I do if I have multiple solutions? Is there a situation that I can have no solutions at all? So this is an assumption. And here the question is basically telling you, you can make this assumption. All the test cases that are going to run on your solution are going to have exactly one solution. And it tells you another also assumption that you can return the answer in any order. Let's say that elements number 2 and 3 are my answer. I can return it as 3 and 2 as well. And here's a sample input, 2, 7, 11, 15 is my array. And my target is to get two numbers that sum up to 9. So here, 2 and 7 is an answer because 2 plus 7 is 9. And I return the indices, not the actual values. So I'm returning here 0 and 1. And yeah, it's just explaining, and it gives you a couple more examples. Here you have more constraints relating to the problem. So it tells you things like, how many elements do I have in this array? It tells you that this is going to be greater or equal to 2. So that's nice, because if it was only one element, then I have an edge case that I need to handle, because the array has only one element. I cannot return 2. So this is something that reflects on the assumptions and testing mentality. I want to see my bounds. The other thing is telling me the maximum number of elements in my array. And this is usually important because it tells me an upper bound of how complex my solution can be. How expensive can my solution be? If my solution is something that goes at n cubed, n power 3, basically my elements, then this would be going beyond the bound of what is typically expected from my solution to perform at. I will also discuss this in more details over next sessions and what it means to use these constraints to think about the solution. How do I have an approximate idea of the expected performance of my solution? What looks feasible and what doesn't look feasible? But at least for this statement, I know that my solution would probably have to be n squared or less in complexity, in time complexity. And here it tells me that my numbers are fitting between 10 power 9 and negative 10 power 9, the integers themselves. Usually, these bounds you would care about if you're choosing a data type, for example. So you can run into a situation where your two variables that you're adding up are integers, but the result does not fit in an integer, because you would then need a long integer, which is another data type. So if you do not handle a case like this, for example, you will get incorrect results, because something that will happen is something called overflow will happen, and your solution will then be incorrect. And it tells you also that your target is between 10 power 9 and negative 10 power 9. And this is nice because it's also telling me that my target is going to be within the integer range as well. Okay, so let's treat this as a problem that I want to solve. Let's just think about the fastest or the easiest way to solve it. My easiest way is to just think about the straightforward thing to do. What's the straightforward thing to do? I want to think about just all possible pairs. I want to look at every pair of numbers and see if they add up to my target or not. And if I find the solution that adds up to my target, I return this answer. So I just want to start by writing up the simple solution. So I say, okay, let's iterate over my array, which is nums. Okay. I'm just doing one iteration, and this iteration is focusing on the first number. This iteration is focusing on the second number. So in two loops, I'm basically able to get the first and second numbers. But I also know that it tells me here, you may not use the same element twice. So that means I cannot return 0, 0. I cannot return 1, 1. I cannot consume the element twice. So I just put a simple restriction. I say, okay, if I is equal to j, please just continue. I don't want to consider this use case because it's not valid. Otherwise, I know at this point that my I and j are different. So what's my next step is to basically see if they add up to my answer. And I want to say if nums of I plus nums of j is equal to my target, then hey, I have a solution. I can return the solution now. So yeah, I would just return here it's expecting me to return them as a vector, so I'm just returning a vector of I and j. Okay, so I would expect this to work. I would run it, and here it's running, and it tells me, oops, I have a problem. You have a non-void function that does not return a value. And that's a problem because I'm only returning inside this loop. And I need to be able for all possible scenarios in this function to return a value. I know from the assumption that I have exactly one solution and it will always exist. So at the end, I can just, hey, I will just return a dummy empty vector because it should never get there if the promise is correct on my test cases. And I just run. So I ran my test case on the sample input, this one, and it passes my cases, and it shows here my cases. But these are not all the test cases. Some test, obviously, a lot of test cases are going to be hidden from you, and your solution is going to be tested on them. So I want to submit my solution to see if this solution works. And yes, here it tells me, yes, your solution is accepted, and it works. It passes correctness, and it passes the time limit that we wanted to pass. Okay, so I want to take this one step further. I want to think of a possible optimization. And looking at the two loops, I can notice that I always go from 0 to the end in both of them. I don't need to do that because if I am considering 2, I only need to consider the numbers that come after 2. If I'm considering 7, then 7 has already been considered with 2 before. I just want to look at the numbers that come afterwards. So one optimization is to say, hey, I want j to start from I plus 1, because then I'm only looking at the ones that come afterwards. And in that case, this situation would never happen. I would never have I equal to j, so I can go ahead and just remove this one. And what we did right now here is something called pruning. So pruning is one of those nice optimizations that you can do to speed up your solution. It does not necessarily mean that your complexity will change. We did not change our complexity. This solution is still n squared. We're doing 2 iterations over our entire search space. So this is n times n. I just did a pruning so that I am doing less number of computations. And in some cases where it's just on the edge, pruning would let you pass the limit of the problem and get your test cases through and your solution be accepted, and sometimes not. And in general, at least from an interview point of view, when you show that you're doing pruning, it's a nice thing that you show that you're eliminating cases that you do not need to look at. So this is one solution that does this answer. And basically, we said we look at 2 things. We look at space and we look at time complexity. Okay. And when we express complexity, we express it usually in the worst case, which is what is the worst case performance for my algorithm in space and in time. So in space here, I'm not using any additional space. I'm just operating on my input arrays. I'm just using the variable iterators that I'm using, but I'm not using space that is dependent on the size of my input. It does not scale with the size of my input. If this is a huge array or a small one, my local space is still the same. So this is what we just call O of 1, space. I'm not needing any space that's dependent on the size of my input. The solution, however, in terms of time is n squared, because I do 2 iterations over my space. And of course, when I say n, I'm referring to, I need to explain this, that I'm referring to the size of this input. Because sometimes problems have n and m. For example, I have 2 different inputs, or I have 2 different kinds of dimensions that I'm looking at. So I would need to express my complexity and say, hey, this is n by m, or x by y, or whatever. So now I have a workable solution. I want to do better. Can I do better? Yes, you can do better. You can come up with another solution that does this slightly faster. For the sake of time, I will also just plug this in really quickly and explain it. Okay. So it's also a very small piece of code, but because I know my data structures and I know that I can utilize one of my data structures to solve this better, I was able to use it. My data structure here is called unordered map, which is basically, think of it as a map that goes from an integer to an integer. So when I ask it, hey, I want the map of X, it gives me Y if I put X and Y in this map. So if I, at some point, hey, I give you, let's think this is a key value, X and Y, and I ask for the map of X, and it gives me Y. Okay. Now, how can I use something like this in my solution? Now, I want to think about it differently. I will iterate only once in this case, not twice. And because of this data structure, I was able to do this. I will say, hey, I want you to first look in the map and find my target minus the current value that I'm standing at. What does this mean? It means that, okay, I know that I have 3 components in my solution, X plus Y equals my target. But I can sort of rephrase this differently. So let's say I'm looking at X right now. I can also translate my problem to, instead of trying to add 2 numbers, I am just looking in my map for target minus Y. I just rearranged this thing into this way. And basically, if target minus Y already existed in my map at some point, it means that the Y has already been there for me. So when I ask it, hey, I want you to do target minus my current number, and equal map.end means that this is this element does not exist, because it tells you, hey, this means that I gave you the end of my data structure. This element you're looking for does not exist. Then I just tell it, okay, fine. I want you to insert in this map myself. So map of my current value is equal to my index. But what if I found it? If I found it, it means that I already found the second index I'm looking for just by doing this simple calculation. And one of the integers is the one I'm looping on, which is I. Okay, and the second one is basically map of target minus my current value. Because I was able to know that at some point I stored this value in my map. Now, when I run this solution, I see that it also works. It passes my test cases. But now when I look at space complexity and time complexity, it's different.
There's a quick question about complexity, if you want to.
In chat, okay. So if the solution has a few variables that do not depend on n, do we still consider it O1? For example, temporary variables. Yes. So these variables are variables that do not scale with my input size. They're fixed for my input size. So essentially, when we do complexity analysis, all kinds of constant complexity in space and time is usually ignored. So I don't need to worry about it. If I'm using 10 variables, even in the case where I say I'm using 1,000 variables, but it still doesn't scale with my input, I can accept this 1,000 as a constant and say, hey, this is a constant, so it's still O1. So usually you treat your complexity space in terms of the size of your input and the size of, and the complexity of your algorithm. In the second situation here, our complexities are slightly different. My space complexity in this situation is actually O of n. Because now I'm relying on a data structure, which is the map, to store basically my, to store this, to do this line, which is storing essentially my values from my nums. And this if statement is within the loop. So in the worst case, I will do this for every single integer I have. So at the worst case, I'm storing on the side, in the order of complexity of my input. But the time complexity for this one is now O of n. So compared to the previous one was O of 1, and the previous one here was O of n squared. So it really depends on what I care more about. If I care more about my time, I will use my second solution. If I care more about the space, then I use the first solution. But usually time is more valuable. So we go ahead and try to submit the solution to see if this also works. And we see that this solution is also passing. So I know this is a very simple example, but also well, I want to see from this interaction if you find what I said is easy enough to follow. If there are things you do not understand about complexity or about C++ or about the data structures. So yes, for example, here I use the unordered map. I do not expect you to know this now, or at least, yeah, maybe know about the data structure. But when we solve problems, I usually will try to explain the data structure first, the kind of complexities you can expect from this data structure, and the different functions you can use on this data structure, and then use it to solve the problem. So in this way, I will try to find a problem on a data structure that we did not discuss before. Let's say we're doing a session about stacks and queues. So we will discuss stacks and queues, what they do, how they function, and then we answer problems that use stacks and queues in their solution.
There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
There are 3 questions.
Okay, let me get to it. Why in the first solution we haven't considered the nj, which is existed in the second loop, and said space complexity is O of n, where a variable is being created every time. No, let me also pull out our previous solution. It's nice you also mentioned this. Okay, so this is our old implementation. And here we're saying int of j is equal to I plus 1, and we're looping. And yes, we are setting j n times. But what is happening here is that if we imagine the memory space, I have j. And then for I start with 0. For j, I start with 1, here I plus 1. So yeah, we start with 1. In the next iteration, I'm not going to create a new j in memory and say, hey, then the next j is 2. Basically, I'm reusing the same variable. I just replace the old value with the new value. So essentially, I just need my 2 iterators, which are just 2 integers. You meant the one before that. I'm sorry, can you unmute and explain your, I don't understand what you mean. Okay, so you mean this one. And we had this. So we're starting from j equals 0. Okay, it's the same thing. I'm starting here from I equals 0 and j equals 0. But at each iteration of this implementation, I'm just having one instance of j.
I add a small input that might make it clear. You can actually declare I and j outside these loops so that you can see clearly that they are not you're not consuming extra space for them every iteration. So you can even say int I and j outside, and so this is all the memory you're using, and internally you're just using them.
This is identical. Here, I'm just saying I have 2 integers, and every time in this loop, this is my initializer, so I'm initializing them to 0, but every time in the loop, at the end of each iteration, it will just increment the same variable, but I'm still using only these 2 integers. And does that answer your question? Okay, perfect.
There is another question. Do you see it, or do you want me to read it?
And that is okay. The second solution assumes map is this one, yeah, from Abdurrahman?
Yes.
The second solution assumes map defined is O of 1, right? It might not be the case if the implementation of the data structure is not as we expect. Yes, this is a nice question as well. So what Abdurrahman is saying, now in my second implementation here, where we improved our performance, here we have map defined. This is a function, and this is actually a very common problem that people have. We're saying here, map defined of a value, my value, okay? We cannot just blindly make the assumption that this is O1. I have to know that the data structure I'm working on will actually do this in O1. This is an unordered map, which sort of makes this promise. But let's say there's another one that's just a map, normal map of int and int. And this is funny. So yeah, let's I should use a better variable name and be writing clean code like I promised. But yeah, sometimes I will just do that. But in a scenario where I'm not using an unordered map, this is actually not valid. My finds are actually going to be logarithmic. It will be log n and not O of 1. 1 second. Unordered map, insert time of O1. Yes, I think this is relating to the same question. Yes, in using the unordered map, we have this promise. Ordered map have some problems. I can do 2 pointers and it will work in ON, because ordered map, if I say it in interview, I should explain the collisions. Yes, so this second question is usually, I would say, not expected all the time. It's very good that you would show the difference, and sometimes you will have to explain why you think this is going to be ON because of collisions. But just saying this is good enough for its purpose. The fact that you know that a collision could happen on my map, which eventually leads to having worse performance, is something that would be nice to explain, and they will appreciate your input here. But they care about the fact that you also know this piece of information, and you know when to use a hash map and when to use the normal map. Does this answer to this question, Ahmed? Perfect. Okay, so then this the last set of questions actually are very important to explain why you need to know your data structures, because knowing your data structure will explain to you when you use a function on this data structure, what is the expected complexity of it. I cannot just blindly say, hey, this is O1. Yeah, you would even sometimes, especially with hash maps in specific, like I would not want to generalize this, but hash maps are something that are very common, and you would want to explain why an unordered map is an O1 in retrieval and so on. So this is in specific, this data structure is usually common enough for this kind of question to come up. But yeah, there are things like red-black trees and more complicated data structures. You should not be expected to know how these operate and the worst-case complexities of them. Okay, I hope that this answered these questions. Okay, I think we have 15 minutes left in this session. And especially because this is the first one, I wanted to dedicate the 15 minutes to questions. And also, one final remark on the content that we talked about. I will share with you in the Discord channel, Discord server on the useful links. I think it was called useful resources. In our Discord channel, I will be sharing 3 links. One is for the LeetCode platform. It's really good. I recommend that you start on it, give it a go. Start with the easy problems. Actually, my recommendation here is solve a lot of easy problems. This is very important. You need to be comfortable with using data structures in easy problems. You need to be able to write code faster than you would usually do. At some point, when you solve a lot of easy problems, your coding speed will go up. Your ability to think about how you use this data structure will also be more comfortable, and then you can answer more medium and hard problems. Actually, like my advice would be, do not solve hard problems. They are interesting, they're nice and challenging. They consume a lot of time for what you can be productive about to prepare. So my advice is, if you're starting out, start solving a lot of easy questions and then do some medium questions in the middle. So I will be sharing that one. On the behavioral side of things, I will share a resource with you from, it's a publicly available resource from Amazon, which is basically the leadership principles. Leadership principles for Amazon are basically the bread and butter of how you should do your behavioral, or what is expected in the behavioral part of the interviews and process. And in my opinion, I think this is generalizable. So it's nice to read the leadership principles, understand the different points they have, and prepare a situation or two where you went through something similar relating to these points. And lastly, I will also share a resource on system design. It's a very lengthy one-page resource on GitHub, but I think it's really great if you want to brush up on system design or understand things, the different components of system design, the things that you need to know. It's a very comprehensive resource. So I will share with you these 3 links after we finish. And now I want to give you more time to ask questions about the session, ask questions about what to expect, the pace, what do you want to discuss more, and I just want to hear more from you in this part, basically. So anyone with questions, please go ahead and discuss them. And in general, I mean, not just relating to this exact session.
Hello, my name
Yes.
is Mahmoud. Okay, I wanted to ask about 2 questions actually. Okay, I graduated from about 3 years, and in the college time, I knew about competitive programming, but I didn't give it too much time, so I didn't like go for ECBC or ACBC. I just did locals, and yeah, I didn't give it too much time. And yeah, you said it's not mandatory, but I see somehow it gives an edge to pass this interviews. So my question here is this edge worth to return back to do some competitive programming, or yeah, just leak code? Because yeah, competitive programming and contests as well gives you a hard time limit, and thinking about more about edge cases and this stuff. So yeah, it's not mandatory, but is the edge worth to return, for example, to code forces and start competing? This is one question. And
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and ask the second one as well.
the second question is about behavioral interviews. So do you like in interviews we're asked about situations you didn't actually go through them in your career before, and what do you do in this situation? That's
Okay. So let me answer the first one. So relating to competitive programming, yes, of course, competitive programming is highly correlated with your ability to solve problems. It's the focus of competitive programming. But what I'm saying is, you do not need to be a competitive programmer to be able to perform very well, and I would say exceptionally well at interviews. You would actually, I would make the claim that even if you're not a competitive programmer, you can perform better in interviews than a competitive programmer. And usually you would see this with indicators in the interviews that go along the lines of a competitive programmer getting a higher verdict from an interviewer, and another non-competitive programming getting a strong higher verdict, because they were able to pay attention to the other points as well. It doesn't mean that the competitive programmer is blindsided and doesn't know these the other important parts of the interview. But I'm saying that competitive programming is giving you a very strong edge on how you tackle the algorithmic and data structure part of the problem, but it's not the only thing. And it also depends on the time frame. If you want to do this in a month, I don't think if you're starting from scratch, you can do competitive programming for a month. I have done competitive programming at some point, and the investment of time that you need would be in the order of a few months or even more. So like, if you want to be competing aggressively and being able to reach the ACPCs and the ICPC, the investment of time you need is much more considerable. So it depends on how fast you want to do it, I guess. If you have limited time to prepare, if you can only afford a month or two, then I expect that without competitive programming, you'd be able to build the required skills you need to perform very well in the interviews, which is also not competitive programming in that sense. But if you want to If you have 6 months, if you have a year, oh yeah, sure, you can go on code forces, you can solve a lot of problems, and you can participate in contests and so on, and it will also be helping you, of course. It's not like I'm saying this is not going to help. I just think the bar for competitive programming in terms of this knowledge and the amount of time you need to spend is much higher than what you need to actually succeed in these kinds of interviews.
I think Ahmad Adil has a question.
Yes, I will also, yeah, sure. Ahmed, ask a question. I will get also to the second question from Mahmoud after I hear from Ahmed.
Thanks. I'm good. I'm not bad at problem solving. Okay. I just now I just wanted to know. Problem solving is not enough, but now I must to learn system design. That's enough to me to be able to work in Fling.
You're asking if you need system design as well, or if problem solving is enough?
No, I know the problem solving is not enough, but it will make me success in the technical interview. But I talk about the system design OOP design pattern.
Okay, so you're asking about if we are going to discuss this kind of content, or
no, I
if you need them.
Is this I will see it in the interviews.
Yes, so
as a fresh grad, I will graduate tomorrow.
Okay, if you're a fresh graduate, yeah, sometimes yes, you will see system design depending on the company. There is no rule here. Some companies have system design for entry positions, some don't. It would be better to just prepare for system design in general. But again, if you have limited time and you can only do so much, I would focus on problem solving first, then system design. But if you're comfortable enough with problem solving, then yes, you need to also study some of the system design material and prepare for it. For object,
continue, sorry.
For OOP, we will also, I mean, yes, it's important, and you can reflect it in your solutions when you're doing some problem solving, when you're doing some system design, or even an OOP specific interview where you're asked to design a class of something that does I don't know 4 or 5 different functionalities, and you need to express this in a class. We can also go over some of this content, but yes, if you're asking, do you need OOP knowledge to be able to do well? I think so. Does that mean that every interview process will have something that's tailored for OOP? No, it can be as simple as seeing that you're writing clean enough code, maybe expressing your complex types into objects and using these objects and using functions and member methods. And if you're doing this is already good enough in your solution. But some companies will have a specific interview for designing a class that has some requirements that you need to do. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you.
Again, also if there is a need to do some of this content as well from time to time, we can have sessions in the middle that address this kind of content. We can also have offline discussions about what you could do. So I'm very flexible about this, and I encourage that you ask questions about what you expect from these sessions. At the end of the day, I have an expectation of what I think you need, but it would be nice if I hear directly from you what you actually need. Okay, I think, I'm sorry, Mahmoud, I forgot your second question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, sure. I was talking about the behavioral questions that it might, at some point, the interviewer asks you about a situation you didn't encounter before in your career or in university.
Yes.
So you can't come in your mind with a similar situation. So what do you do in this situation?
That's a very common problem, and I mean, there are 2 ways you can handle this. You can express to the interviewer that you haven't encountered a situation that quantifies enough to this kind of problem. Maybe that's one way to do it. My recommendation would be to, as much as possible, try to find a situation that you went through that might relate to this. Or if it doesn't, then you can also sort of prepare this scenario in your head and sort of imagine that if you were in this scenario, what would you do, and then express that. You can also just express this as if it's a situation that happened to you. But then, of course, it's subject to the problem of if the interviewer probes this or follows this question up with more questions. And if you're not ready enough for this kind of answer, you might also show that this is something that you are coming up with or something like that. So my recommendation is either, or in a situation where you didn't personally go through it before, try to imagine that situation and come up with a situation of how you would actually behave in that and explain it in this way.
Yeah, but in this case, I should mention that I didn't encounter this situation before, but I'm imagining
Yes.
me in this situation and I'm acting based on this. Yeah.
Yes, this is my recommendation. Some people could say just come up with a situation and say it. You can handle it however you want. At the end of the day, in general, I think it's always best to be honest about your thoughts. It's always best to be honest about your experience. And there is no penalty for not going through something similar. The interviewer will ask you something different. They want to come up with something about how you think, and they will try different ways of probing you. So if this is a situation you didn't go through, which is something they would expect, they will give you another one.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have also any questions in chat or?
No, I think this is all the questions we have so far.
Okay. Does anyone have more questions? We have maybe a few minutes.
I want to ask you another thing.
Sure.
Can you send in general more sources about how I learn the system design?
Yes, of course. I will share with you maybe a couple of very good resources. They're very popular. You can have a look at them. I don't like to go through time-consuming resources like books. So this is really up to preference. I am the kind of person that likes to go through a summarized version of the important things that I need, and I can share with you something of this nature. If you need a different kind of resource, I can also try to find you something different. But I hope at least the ones I share with you can get you started, and in my opinion, would be also enough to be prepared.
Okay, I just wanted to know something. You will put problems and we will solve it, or
I can do all of this. I can discuss. Usually, I will try to use the online sessions to explain concepts and to try to solve these problems together. But again, I don't know my audience enough yet, so I can also ask this differently, like about the level of everyone attending, what they expect to the speed to be. So that I will also try to either do this, and we can ask this question in a moment to know from the current audience, and then I can also maybe post a poll or something to understand where everyone is standing, and I will try to manage the content to basically the majority of the attendees. But if people care about also getting a list of problems to go through in an offline manner, or prepare some, let's think of it as a homework or something, and maybe I can have a look at some of the solutions where you're struggling or address the problem together, I can also do that. So if you want me to recommend problems to solve offline, I can do that.
In general, if you have any
I
suggestions,
prepare to ACM, okay, I solve much.
Okay.
in general, if you have any suggestions for the whole session, just we can always post it in general. We also have a question in the chat and a question in the participants. So one question in the chat: what should I do if I'm stuck on a problem? And there also Hussein wants to ask a question after that.
Okay, so what should you do if you're stuck on a problem in an interview? Well, basically, there's you want to, as much as possible, not be stuck and silent. If you're stuck on a problem in an interview, you want to try to probe the interviewer about more assumptions. You want to discuss more about the problem with the interviewer in an engaging sense, while you're actually also trying to think internally about the solution. This buys you time, and at the same time, you're maybe asking about things that can help you guide through the problem. This kind of discussion can either buy you some time, or at the same time, the interviewer can give you, I wouldn't even quantify this as a hint, but give you more data about the problem to help you answer the question. It helps that if you are stuck, to try to simplify the problem. You can tell the interviewer, I don't know, or I haven't formulated the exact solution for the whole problem, but I think maybe we can answer this sub-problem. So let's think about this part of the problem. I think we can do 1, 2, 3 here. So you can try to divide the problem into smaller segments. And as you're going, if the interviewer is feeling that you're either on the wrong direction or that you're stuck and you need to be unstuck, the interviewer can start by giving you a small hint, and then another hint, and maybe a bigger one. It depends. So hints will potentially unblock you, but what you can do from your side is to either try to break the problem down into a smaller problem, and so, or smaller set of problems, or make an assumption and tell the interviewer, I don't know what I can do if the data is not sorted, but maybe if we can make the assumption that the data is sorted, we can do 1, 2, 3. Or maybe I want to start my solution by sorting this data, and I know that this will probably be not what we want, but it will help me to think about the solution in this manner. So you can either try to find a simpler problem that you can solve and express that, or if you're discussing with the interviewer and the interviewer gives you a hint, try to actually see what the interviewer is trying to say from the hint. Does that answer to this problem?
Okay, we have a question from
Hussein?
Hussein, yeah.
Hussein, if you're trying to speak up, I cannot hear you. I still can't hear you if you're speaking. Can you type your question in chat, maybe? In the meantime, does anyone else also have questions? So I also wanted to ask about what you generally expect. Is everyone, does everyone want this content to be gradual and starts from the beginning, starting from simple problems to solve, simple data structures, and progress from there gradually? Or do you think that most of us here has enough foundation on some of these data structures or algorithms and wants to do something that is slightly more advanced, or go to slightly more difficult kinds of problems? So please type in chat if you want it to be gradual from the beginning, or if you have a certain baseline and you want to start from somewhere different, just tell me in chat that you have a baseline that you want to discuss, and I can hear from you as well.
I think we can maybe conduct like some poll on Discord for yeah.
We can do a poll.
If you can say
Yeah.
something, yeah, just you can pull on Discord and see what people levels are expecting.
Fair enough. Okay. All right. I think this is the end of my agenda for today, and I hope this was useful. I hope that you found this engaging and good enough. If there's something that was unclear, please express also on Discord, and we will do a poll about how we can progress from here. And I hope to see you again next time.